This program is brought to you by the Stanford Humanities Center. For more information, please visit us at shc.stanford.edu.
I'm currently a dance historian, but in my previous life, I was a dance critic for a number of years for a daily newspaper. And in the course of writing dance journalism, I found myself encountering repeatedly this name, Leonid Yakobsen. This was in the 1970s when there was a series of celebrated defections of Russian dancers. And each time a major dancer defected, of the big three, Rudolf Nureyev, Natalia Makarova, and Mikhail Baryshnikov, they carried with them this sort of whispered trace of the one modernist, the one radical, the one artist in the Soviet state who was making challenging ballets in the highest tiers of culture production, which was the Kirov and Bolshoi ballets. And they also mentioned that he was the only Jewish choreographer. So I was intrigued. At that point, there was no real way to access any information about him. And then two other intersections between my life and Yakobsen happened. One was in 1981 when an organization called the, I think it was called the Bay Area Council for Soviet Jewry, maintained a list of Soviet Jews who were refuseniks, who were being detained in Soviet Russia, trying to emigrate to Israel. And letter writing campaigns were one mode to try to loosen the state hold on them. And there in the list of refuseniks was Irina Yakobsen, and the identifier for her was widow of a famous choreographer. And I immediately thought, my goodness, this is amazing. Reason for rejection for her request to leave was state considerations, which I later learned meant they thought she would bring in her memory the entire repertoire of the Kirov out and restage it in the West. And so I was intrigued, but nothing really came of that. And then 4 years later, a friend who was teaching at San Francisco Ballet called me up and he said, Janice, this amazing teacher has just been hired by Helgi Thomason, the director. She's the widow of some famous guy, I don't know. Her name is Irina Yakobsen. And I thought, oh my goodness, that I'd struck finally close to home. And I proceeded to interview her. And at that first interview, Natalia Makarova was a de facto translator because Irina didn't speak English, I didn't speak Russian. But it grew into what became a 20-year trail of trying to write this story. And I found in the beginning, I wrote a feature for the New York Times Arts and Leisure about the recovery of this kind of lost artist in Soviet Russia with Irina's arrival. And I wrote again and again for in different forums. And each time my editor said, great story, but you're not giving us any quotes from reviews about him. Where are the books on him? Where are the films? Give us some other data here to substantiate the claims of who he was. And I realized that there was nothing. There was essentially nothing. That in his lifetime, it was forbidden to write his name in Pravda or Izvestia, the two leading party papers in the Soviet Union. So nothing was reviewed. No films, no books. He was effectively erased from history. And I, over time, realized that erasure was a critical part of the story for me. And I began with the question of why. Why would a totalitarian regime expend that kind of effort to let a choreographer keep making work, but keep censoring him at every stage, insisting at these various layers of party review before a work got to the stage, that this movement had to be taken out, that character, costumes were wrong, music was wrong. And yet they let it go forward. The knock never came at the door for him. He always said it was because Stalin died first. But at any rate, it became an amazing story for me, and that is really what the book is about. It begins with this question of what ballet's function was in Soviet Russia, really from the moment of the Bolshevik Revolution forward. And that is, I argue, it was where the idealized obedient citizen, in a way, was manufactured and modeled, was on the ballet stage. That it has been a site from the French courts forward where a kind of civic ordering gets performed again and again through classical ballet. And Yakobsen, in this site of production, which was a very valued art form in Soviet Russia, cinema and ballet were considered two critical art forms for kind of messaging what was largely an illiterate proletariat at the start of the post-Bolshevik Revolution period. The Soviets wanted that to be a vibrant form for their messages. Yakobsen was a great artist, and he kept slipping in his own subversive messages, the wrong body types. He made ballets on Jewish themes at the height of Stalin's repression against the Soviet Jews. So he was brave on the ballet stage. He was a warrior in a way. And so that kind of is the story. It's very much a cultural history intertwined with its continual kind of intersection and collision between art making and the power of the state. So do I have a couple more minutes?
I don't know.
I wasn't counting my time. I don't know. So I could read just a tiny, tiny bit, I think, at the start. I often, when I speak about the book, I often say before there was Pussy Riot, there was Leonid Yakobsen. Because this idea of using art as a mode of resistance in Soviet Russia is a sport that goes back a long time. And one other story before I'll read you a little couple paragraphs. I found as researching it that I did a lot of research in Moscow, Petersburg, but also in Israel, where a lot of 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union emigrated. And often if they knew nothing really about ballet, they would say, you know, there's this one moment I remember in 82, 84, 85, 91, when Swan Lake came on the television. Regular programming was preempted on Soviet TV, and it was wall-to-wall Swan Lake. And I, first of all, thought, sort of discounted it. And then I came back to that, and that is how my book opens, which is that Swan Lake, when Brezhnev dies after 20 years in power suddenly, the Soviet officials are kind of unmoored about how to break the news, and rather than saying he's dead, here's the successor, they put Swan Lake on. It happened again with Andropov, Chernenko. Each time the subsequent leaders, and there were 3 that died in the next 3 years, passed away suddenly, they put on Swan Lake as a kind of social palliative, really. Kind of stay calm, keep dancing message to the populace. And I thought it was so telling that it carries that kind of weight and cultural value. So those are the stories that helped me begin to unpack the why around his being censored. I just wanted to read a tiny bit of where my research actually intersected directly here at Stanford, and that's the Hoover Archives, which hold the papers from the American Red Cross, which was very active in the period of the 1914-17, in that period when Russia was in shambles from the revolution. And in there I found the earliest really scholarship or documentation of what Yakobsen must have lived through. No photo exists of the iron knuckles that the teenaged Leonid Yakobsen obtained in the autumn of 1918. He acquired the knuckles to protect his 2 younger brothers from 2 older children stealing their warm coats, while the 3 Yakobsen boys, Leonid 14, Sergei 13, and Konstantin 12, were part of the Petrograd Children's Colony. a storied encampment of 800 orphaned children trapped in the Ural Mountains near western Siberia during the Bolshevik Revolution. Yakobsen kept these iron knuckles in his pocket for most of his life, explaining that they offered him a sense of security while returning home from work late at night. It's not always safe in the Soviet Union, he said. And that's the kind of opening of the second chapter, and I'll just jump in a tiny bit. In the months following the Bolshevik takeover of the October Revolution and its collapse into the tumult of the proletariat dictatorship of early 1918, Vera Yakobsen found herself unable to feed and clothe her 5 children. She decided to keep her 2 older daughters with her, this is his mother, but take her 3 sons to Petrograd's Finland station, where she put them on one of the 3 train caravans filled with children whose parents were similarly sending them to a safer location with more available food. The expectation was that they would spend the summer regaining their health, enjoy the outdoors, and return in a couple of months. From the start, however, the journey did not go as anticipated. What should have been a 2-day trip to the town of Mias in the southern Urals stretched into a 4-week ordeal because of the chaos of the railroad system. There were repeated delays due to mined bridges, threats to security, and day-long stops when the children would leave the train to search for food. Finally, in July, the transport arrived at a former summer resort, and the children began a 2-month period of taking classes, swimming, rejuvenating. But by August, the tensions between the Bolsheviks and other parties had deteriorated into a full-scale Russian civil war. An army of 80,000 Czech troops was trying to cross the breadth of Russia, and the Poles had invaded. Piecing together what happened from a series of unpublished archival reports from the field made by members of the American Red Cross, it seems that the spreading famine, currency devaluations, and social chaos cut off the children from their families and made it impossible to send them money, food, or clothing. With the chill of the Siberian fall beginning and the food supplies the colony had brought with them exhausted, the Russian staff and teachers overseeing hundreds of hungry children in warm summer clothes panicked. As food for the children diminished to watery soup, the frightened teachers divided the children into 7 groups and sent them out in different directions. Hoping that townspeople and villagers might take them in, most of the Russian teachers and staff then fled, taking with them all of the remaining money and abandoning the children. And so begins his life as a child, and I really think in his survival through that, he gained the strength to survive what lay ahead with Stalin. So that's my part. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Stanford Humanities Center. For more information, please visit us at shc.stanford.edu.